Working late shifts at a restaurant during the holidays was never my long-term plan. Like many service jobs, it was meant to be temporary, just enough to cover my rent and bills until I figured out my next step. But somehow, I got stuck in the routine, closing up almost every night. I was 22 and didn't really mind. The tips were decent, and it wasn't too busy in the late hours. It gave me time to think, time to plan for whatever came next. But working late also carries its own dangers. One night, right before Christmas, I learned the hard way that not everyone who comes through the door is just looking for food. It started like any other late shift. The restaurant was quiet, just a few customers scattered around. Most people had already gone home for the holidays, so it was the usual slow stream of diners. Families passing through town, a couple of truckers, and the occasional lone traveler wanting a hot meal. By 10:30 p.m., the place was almost empty, with only one table left to serve. It was a group of 4 men who had arrived about 30 minutes before closing. They looked rough, all wearing worn clothes, with tired faces, and a hard edge that made me uneasy. But they didn't seem dangerous, just a little too loud, a little too forward. The leader, a man with a scruffy beard and a worn leather jacket, seemed particularly interested in me. He kept catching my eye every time I walked past, making comments that felt innocent at first, like casual compliment. But as the night went on, his remarks started to change from playful to improper. "Hey, sweetheart, why don't you bring me some extra sugar with that coffee? Bet you get a lot of attention here, huh?" Must drive the guys crazy. I forced a smile each time, dismissing it as part of the job. This wasn't my first time dealing with customers like this. It wasn't uncommon for people to get a little too friendly after a few drinks, and as long as they stayed on their side of the table, I could handle it. But there was something about the way he watched me, the way his eyes followed me around the restaurant, that made my skin prickle. His stare felt hungry. Around 10:45, the men ordered another round of drinks. I glanced at the clock and saw closing time was in 15 minutes, and I was already eager to leave. But the kitchen had shut down, and all that was left was to clear the last dishes and wait for them to finish. I brought their drinks over, trying to keep the conversation brief, but the man in the leather jacket wasn't having it. "Why so quiet, sweetheart? You're not shy, are you?" he said, his grin widening as he reached for his drink. "Come on, sit with us for a bit. You look like you could use some company." "I can't," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Got a lot of closing work to do." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We're the only ones here. The boss isn't going to mind if you sit with us for a minute, is he?" The other men chuckled, their voices low and conspiring. I felt my stomach tighten, my heart beating a little faster. I didn't want to cause a scene, didn't want to escalate the situation, so I laughed it off, gave some excuse about needing to finish up, and walked away. But I could feel their eyes on me the entire time. By the time the clock hit 11 p.m., I was more than ready for them to leave. They'd finished their drinks, and I had cleared their table, but they weren't making any move to go. Instead, they lingered, talking loudly among themselves, throwing glances my way. Every few minutes, the man in the leather jacket stood up and walked to the counter, leaning over with a grin. "Got plans tonight?" he asked, his voice smooth and casual, like we were old friends. "You should come hang out with us. We're just passing through, but we could use some company." A cold knot of fear twisted in my stomach. "Sorry, I've got to head home after this," I said, keeping my voice steady. He didn't move, just kept leaning over the counter, his eyes fixed on me. "Home, huh? Alone?" That question hung in the air for a moment too long, making me feel exposed, vulnerable. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the unease. "Yep, my cat's waiting for me." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A cat? That's too bad. I was hoping you'd have more exciting plans." I didn't respond. My hands were shaking as I wiped down the counter, trying to look busy, trying to avoid eye contact. The rest of the group finally got up, throwing a few crumpled bills on the table. They laughed and joked with each other as they headed for the door, but the man in the leather jacket stayed back, lingering for just a moment longer. "We'll be seeing you, sweetheart," he said, his voice low, a promise rather than a question. I locked the door the second they were gone, my heart still racing. I told myself it was over, that I just had to deal with a few rowdy guys who liked to push boundaries. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. But as I turned off the lights and grabbed my coat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The restaurant was quiet now, the only sound the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I grabbed my keys and headed out the back door, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. I was parked in the small employee lot behind the building, the streetlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. That's when I saw him. The man in the leather jacket was standing near my car, leaning against the driver's side door, like he was waiting for me. My heart skipped a beat, panic rising in my chest, as I realized I was completely alone with him. "Hey," he called out, his voice casual, but there was something darker beneath it. "Figured I'd wait for you. Thought we could have that chat you were too busy for earlier." I didn't know what to say. I was trying to figure out how to get out of this without making things worse. "I'm really tired," I said, my voice trembling. "I just want to go home." He stepped away from the car, moving closer. "Come on, don't be like that. I'm just trying to be friendly." My mind was screaming to flee, but my legs refused to move. He was too close, too casual, his posture relaxed but menacing. I could feel the adrenaline kicking in, my pulse racing as he moved closer still. "You don't need to be scared," he said, his voice soft now, as if trying to soothe me. "I just want to talk." I backed up instinctively, my hand gripping my keys like a weapon. "Please, just go," I said, my voice firm but shaky. "I don't want any trouble." His smile faded, and something flickered in his eyes, something dangerous. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his tone turning cold. "I'm trying to be nice here." That's when I snapped. I didn't think, I just reacted. I raised my hand and swung the keys at him, the sharp end of the key grazing his cheek. He stumbled back, surprised, his hand going to his face. Before he could recover, I bolted for the car. I fumbled with the lock, my hands trembling so badly I could barely get the key in. I heard him coming toward me, his footsteps quick and angry, but I managed to get the door open just in time. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut and locking it as fast as I could. He pounded on the window, his face twisted in rage. "Open the door," he shouted, but I wasn't listening. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot. I didn't stop until I was halfway home, the road a blur in my peripheral vision. I filed a police report the next day, but the man was never caught. I didn't know his name, didn't know where he was from, just the image of his face twisted in anger burned into my mind. For weeks I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting for another chance. I stopped working the late shifts after that, switched to mornings where there were always more people around. But every time I locked up the restaurant at night, I felt that same prickle of fear, that same sinking feeling in my stomach. I don't know what he wanted, but I know it wasn't just a talk, and I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he realized I wasn't going to be an easy target. Sometimes surviving isn't just about running, it's about fighting back, and in that moment, I knew I had no other choice. Traveling alone was something I'd always wanted to do. For years I'd imagined myself wandering through foreign streets, tasting new foods, meeting interesting people. So when I finally booked my solo trip to Costa Rica, I was beyond excited. I'd saved up for months, planning the perfect itinerary: rainforest hikes, beach days, and plenty of time to relax. It was going to be the adventure of a lifetime. Or at least, that's what I thought. When I landed, the first few days were a dream. I stayed in a little Airbnb, in a quiet coastal town, the kind of place where the air always smelled like salt water, and the locals were as warm as the weather. I spent my mornings exploring, my afternoons lounging by the beach, and my evenings trying local restaurants. Everything felt perfect, but I should have known that perfection doesn't last. Not when someone is watching you. It was my 5th night in Costa Rica, and I had just finished a long day of hiking through one of the nearby national parks. My legs were sore, my skin warm from the sun, and all I wanted was a good meal. I found a small restaurant tucked away on a side street, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. It was quiet, cozy, with soft music playing, and the smell of grilled fish wafting from the kitchen. I picked a table near the back, close to a window where I could feel the evening breeze. The place wasn't crowded, just a couple of locals at the bar, chatting over drinks and a few other tourists scattered around. I ordered a glass of wine and the house special, excited to unwind after the long day. I hadn't been sitting there for long when I noticed him. At first it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. He was just a man sitting a few tables over, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and a sun-worn He was dressed casually, like a tourist, khaki shorts, a button-up shirt, and sandals. Nothing about him stood out, except for the fact that he kept looking over at me. I'm used to people looking when you're a solo female traveler. People tend to notice you, especially in places where tourists aren't as common. At first I brushed it off, telling myself that he was probably just curious about where I was from, or maybe he wanted to ask for a recommendation. But the longer I sat there, the more frequent his glances became. He wasn't just curious, he was staring. I tried to ignore him, focusing on my food, scrolling through my phone, anything to avoid eye contact. But after a few minutes, I saw him get up from his table and start walking toward me. My heart sank, a mix of irritation and unease settling in my chest. This was the last thing I wanted, a conversation with some random guy, when all I wanted was to enjoy my meal in peace. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice thick with a foreign accent. I didn't want to be rude. After all, I was a guest in this country, and he hadn't done anything wrong yet, so I nodded reluctantly, hoping this would end soon. "I couldn't help but notice you're here alone," he said, his eyes fixed on me in a way that made a chill creep up my back. "Where are you from?" "California," I answered, keeping my tone polite but distant. "Just visiting for a few days." He smiled, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the warm, friendly smile of a fellow traveler. It was too eager, too intense. "You're a long way from home," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Traveling alone can be dangerous, you know." The comment caught me off guard. It was the way he said it, like a warning, like he knew something I didn't. "I've been fine so far," I said, forcing a smile. "Costa Rica's been great." His smile widened, but his eyes never softened. "Well, you should be careful. Not everyone you meet has good intentions." I nodded, not sure how to respond. My gut was telling me to end the conversation, to get away from him, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I finished the last of my wine and stood up, trying to keep things casual. "It was nice talking to you, but I've got an early morning tomorrow," I said, grabbing my bag. He stood up too, little too quickly. "Let me walk you back," he offered. "I know these streets can be confusing at night." I shook my head, feeling my pulse quicken. "No thank you, I'm fine on my own." For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. Then slowly, he stepped aside, letting me pass. "See you around," he said as I walked away. I left the restaurant, feeling uneasy, the man's words echoing in my head. Not everyone you meet has good intentions. The streets were quiet as I made my way back to my Airbnb, the night air cool against my skin. I kept my pace brisk, my eyes darting around, scanning the shadows. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, it was just a weird conversation with a guy who didn't know how to take a hint. But as I turned down the narrow street leading to my Airbnb, I heard footsteps behind me. At first they were faint, barely noticeable, but as I kept walking, they grew louder, closer. My heart started to race, my palms slick with sweat. I looked over my shoulder, hoping it was just another tourist or a local heading home. It was him. The man from the restaurant was following me. Fear overwhelmed me, my thoughts racing in a desperate attempt to figure out what to do. My Airbnb was only a few blocks away, but I didn't want him to know where I was staying. I quickened my pace, hoping he'd take the hint and leave me alone. But the footsteps didn't stop. They kept getting closer. I reached my Airbnb in record time, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I could still hear the footsteps behind me, steady and deliberate. I looked over my shoulder again, and there he was, standing at the end of the street, watching me. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, his eyes fixed on me, like a predator watching its prey. I hurried inside, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. I leaned against the door, listening, waiting for the sound of him walking away, but all I heard was silence. For a few minutes, I stood there, too afraid to move, too afraid to look outside. The creeping sense that he was still out there, waiting for me, wouldn't go away. Finally, I forced myself to move, heading to the window to peek through the curtains. The street was empty. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm myself down. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he'd just been walking in the same direction, and I'd let my imagination get the better of me. I double-checked the locks on the door, turned off the lights, and crawled into bed, hoping sleep would come quickly. But sleep didn't come. Not that night. I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan of the old building. My mind was replaying the encounter at the restaurant, the way he had followed me, the way he had stood there, watching. I told myself it was over, that I was safe inside, but then I heard it. A soft, tapping sound. Faint, but unmistakable. It was coming from the window. My heart stopped. I lay there frozen, listening as the tapping grew louder, more insistent. My stomach churned with fear. Slowly I got out of bed and crept toward the window, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see what I already knew was there, but I had to. I pulled back the curtain, just enough to peek through, and there he was. The man was standing outside my window, his face inches from the glass, his breath fogging up the pane. His eyes were wild, filled with something dark and twisted. He smiled when he saw me, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a wave of terror through me. I stumbled back. Now he was outside my window, watching me. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed the emergency number for the local police. My voice was barely a whisper, as I explained what was happening, begging them to send someone quickly. I could hear him tapping on the window again, harder this time, like he was testing it, trying to find a way in. It felt like hours before I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The tapping stopped, and I rushed to the window, praying the man was gone. The police arrived, just as he was walking away, disappearing into the shadows of the narrow street. They searched the area, but he was long gone. I gave them a description of the man, told them about the restaurant, and how he had followed me, but they didn't seem optimistic about finding him. He's probably a drifter, one of the officers said. These types of guys come and go. Best to be careful, especially when you're traveling alone. They offered to have someone keep an eye on the street for the night, but I didn't sleep a wink. The image of his face outside my window haunted me every time I closed my eyes. I left Costa Rica 2 days later, cutting my trip short. I couldn't stay there, not after what had happened. It's been months now, and I'm back home, but the fear hasn't gone away. Every time I'm out in public, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, scanning the crowd for his face. I know that no matter how far I run, no matter how safe I think I am, there are people out there who don't care about boundaries, and sometimes they find you. I had always dreamed of working in a high-end restaurant, the thrill of creating dishes people would remember long after they left, the intensity of a professional kitchen, the satisfaction of being part of something extraordinary. That was what I had signed up for. So when I got the opportunity to work at this particular establishment, whose name I'll keep private to avoid legal issues, one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city, I didn't hesitate. The place had a reputation, not just for its food, but for its head chef, Mark. He was a genius in the culinary world, brilliant, intense, and completely uncompromising. Every dish that left the kitchen was a reflection of his obsession with perfection. I had heard stories about his temper, his strange habits, but none of it mattered to me at the time. This was my chance to make a name for myself. I never expected to uncover what I did. From the moment I stepped into the kitchen, I knew it wasn't like anywhere I'd worked before. There was a kind of tension that hummed in the air, a quiet pressure that kept everyone on edge. Marco barely spoke to me the first few weeks, just the occasional nod or grunt as I plated dishes under his watchful eye. He didn't need to say much. His presence was enough to keep everyone in line. But as the weeks went on, I started to notice things, like the way Marco always worked late, long after the rest of us had left. The way he guarded the walk-in fridge, like it held some precious secret. The way he would disappear into the back of the kitchen, sometimes for hours, emerging with trays of food that didn't seem to be on the menu. At first, I didn't think much of it. Marco was a perfectionist. He was known for his experimental dishes, and if that meant working late and being secretive, so be it. But the more I saw, the harder it became to shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was a Tuesday night, and the restaurant had just closed. The last customers had left, and the rest of the staff was cleaning up, preparing for the next day. I was scrubbing down my station when I noticed Marco slip into the walk-in fridge, carrying a large box I hadn't seen before. He didn't say anything to anyone, just disappeared into the cold room with the door swinging shut behind him. I don't know what made me follow him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. But a few minutes later, when I saw him leave the fridge and head toward the back office, I decided to take a quick look inside. I shouldn't have done that. Inside the walk-in, everything looked normal at first. Shelves of fresh produce, meats and dairy, all the usual supplies we used in the restaurant. But as I moved further in, I noticed something strange. Tucked away on the bottom shelf, half hidden behind a stack of boxes, was a container I didn't recognize. I knelt down, lifting the lid just a bit, and recoiled at the sight. There was a small altar. It was covered in strange symbols, candles that had burned down to stubs, and a small bowl filled with a dark liquid that smelled metallic, like blood. I froze. What the hell was this? I backed away slowly, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just some eccentric chef's ritual. It felt wrong, dark. Before I could examine it further, I heard footsteps coming down the hall. Marco's unmistakable stride. I slammed the walk-in door shut and darted back to my station. I didn't want to know what would happen if he caught me in there. From that night on, I couldn't stop thinking about the altar. I started watching Marco more closely, paying attention to his strange habits, his late-night ritual. Every night after closing, he would disappear into the walk-in fridge, always carrying something in an unmarked jar, a bundle wrapped in cloth, and I could hear him whispering again, that same rhythmic The more I watched, the more I realized that Marco's obsession wasn't just about perfecting his dishes. There was something else driving him, something darker. It was around this time that I started noticing the regular. There were a few customers who came in almost every night, wealthy, well-dressed, and always eager for whatever Marco had on the menu. They didn't just eat their meals, they devoured them. It wasn't just the regulars, either. Business was booming. No matter what time of year, the restaurant was always packed. People clamoring for a table, desperate to experience Marco's food. But it wasn't just about the food anymore. There was something more pulling them in, something unnatural. I couldn't take it anymore. One night after the restaurant had closed, and the staff had gone home, I decided to confront Marco. I waited until I heard him slip into the back, then followed him into the walk-in. I was incredibly nervous. When I opened the door, I found him standing in front of the altar, a small bundle of herbs in one hand, and a knife in the other. His back was to me, and he was chanting again, his voice low and rhythmic. "What are you doing?" I asked. Marco turned slowly, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice calm but filled with a warning. "I've seen what you're doing," I said, my fear giving way to anger. "The altar, the rituals. What the hell is going on here?" For a moment Marco didn't say anything. He just stared at me. Then he smiled, a calculated, eerie smile that filled me with an icy dread. "This is what keeps them coming back." A wave of nausea washed over me. "What do you mean?" "The customers, the regulars, the success of this restaurant. It's not just the food, it's the ritual, the offering. It binds them to this place. They can't stay away. It's why they crave it." I took a step back. This was insane. Marco was performing some kind of dark magic to keep the restaurant successful. It's a pact. The more I give, the more they come. They can't resist it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My hands were trembling, my throat dry. "You're insane," I whispered. Marco's smile widened. "Maybe, but it works, doesn't it? You've seen it. People can't get enough. They keep coming back, over and over." I felt trapped by the weight of his words. I don't know how long I stood there. Marco's smile never wavered, his eyes never leaving mine. I had to get out of there, before it was too late. I can't do this, I said, my voice shaking. I'm done. I'm leaving. Marco's expression darkened. You can't leave. I don't want any part of this, I said, backing toward the door. You've already seen too much, he said, his voice cold, and you won't be the first to try and leave. That was it. That was my breaking point. I turned and bolted for the door. I ran through the kitchen, past the empty dining room, and out the front door, until I was out on the street. I didn't go back to that restaurant. I didn't even bother to pick up my last paycheck. I just left, and got as far away from that place as I could. To this day, I keep thinking if Marco's ritual is still working, still drawing people in. Sometimes I catch myself checking restaurant reviews online, scanning for any mention of that restaurant, wondering if the customers know what's really happening behind those kitchen doors. Marco wasn't just a chef. He was something else, something far more dangerous. I'd never been the kind of person to attract much attention. At 19, fresh out of high school, I was just another girl working a diner job, making tips and saving for college. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked it. The customers were usually friendly, the regulars predictable, and the diner itself had a cozy, almost nostalgic feel to it. The kind of place you'd expect to find in a small town. I started working there during the summer, right after graduation. The diner was tucked away on the edge of town, a little too far off the main road to get much traffic, but we had a handful of regulars who kept the place going. I liked the routine of it, the way each day felt familiar, but it wasn't long before that sense of comfort started to crack. It all began with Adrian. He wasn't much older than me, maybe mid-20s, and he came in a few times a week. At first, I didn't think much of him. He seemed like a quiet, harmless guy. He'd sit in the same booth every time, near the window, and order a coffee and a sandwich. He never said much beyond small talk, and I figured he was just one of those regulars who liked his routine. But it didn't stay that way for long. The first time Adrian crossed the line, I brushed it off as a harmless joke. He had made a comment about how I looked in my uniform, something about the way the apron suited me. I smiled politely, but something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. It wasn't outright creepy, but there was an undertone I couldn't quite play. I didn't mention it to anyone. I mean, it's the service industry. You get comments all the time, and most of them don't mean anything. But the next time Adrian came in, he was bolder. He started asking more personal questions, whether I had a boyfriend, what I liked to do in my free time, whether I lived nearby. I kept my answers short, trying to steer the conversation back to his order, but he wasn't easily dissuaded. His tone was always light, almost playful, but I could feel the intensity behind his words. He was fishing for more than casual conversation. It was around this time that I started to notice him lingering outside the diner after his meal. At first it was just a few minutes, like he was finishing his coffee or enjoying the weather, but then he started staying longer, standing across the street, watching the diner through the window. He'd smile and wave if he caught my eye, but the smile didn't feel friendly anymore. It felt possessive. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when things took a turn for the worse. The lunch rush had died down, and I was wiping down the counters when I saw him again. Adrian, sitting in his usual booth. But this time, something was different. He wasn't reading a book or scrolling through his phone like he normally did. He was just watching me. I kept working, trying not to let it get to me, but then when I went over to his table to refill his coffee, he slid a folded piece of paper across the table toward me. "What's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Just a little something for you," he said, smiling that same too wide smile. "Thought you might like it." I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me. I unfolded the paper, and my stomach dropped. It was a picture of me, taken from outside the diner. In the photo, I was cleaning tables, completely unaware that I was being watched. The picture was grainy, taken from a distance, but it was unmistakably me. I felt a cold shudder rip through my body. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. "I thought you looked cute," Adrian said, his tone still light, as if he hadn't just crossed a major boundary. I didn't know what to say. My hands were shaking, and I could feel the heat rising to my face. I wanted to yell at him, tell him to leave, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I walked away, shoving the picture in my apron pocket and trying to steady my breathing. I told my manager about it later, but all he did was shrug. "If he's not threatening you, there's not much we can do," he said. "Just keep an eye on him. Maybe he'll get bored and move on." But I knew Adrian wasn't going to get bored. He was only just getting started. A few days later, I found another picture. This one wasn't at the diner. It was tucked under the windshield wiper of my car, parked outside my apartment. It was another photo of me, taken from behind as I walked to my car after my shift. I felt my heart thumping in my chest as I looked around, fearing he was hiding in the darkness. He had followed me home. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking the locks on the doors and windows, my mind racing with possibilities. What if he was outside right now? What if he tried to break in? I felt exposed, vulnerable, like my life wasn't mine anymore. I went to the police the next day, but like my manager, they didn't take it seriously. "He hasn't made any direct threats," they said. "We can file a report, but unless he does something, there's not much we can do." I left the station feeling helpless. Adrian hadn't threatened me, but I knew in my gut that it wasn't going to stop. The pictures were getting closer, more personal. He was testing my boundaries, seeing how far he could push. A week later, I found a note in my mailbox. No picture this time, just a letter. It was written in neat, careful handwriting. "I know where you live now. We don't have to meet at the diner anymore. See you soon, Adrian." That was it. No more pretending it would go away on its own. No more waiting for him to cross some invisible line. He had already crossed every line there was. I went straight to the police again, this time with the letter in hand. Finally, they took me seriously. They helped me file for a restraining order and advised me to quit my job at the diner, at least until things settled down. I didn't need much convincing. I handed in my resignation the next day, but even after I left the diner, the fear didn't go away. Every time I walked out of my apartment, I found myself scanning the street, searching for any sign of him. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to dial 911 at the first hint of danger. The creepy sense that he was still watching clung to me. Weeks passed, and I hadn't seen him around town, hadn't found any more pictures or letters. For a while I started to believe that maybe the restraining order had scared him off, that maybe he had finally given up. But the fear never fully went away. Even now, months later, I still jump at every unfamiliar face. I still check my rearview mirror constantly when I drive home, expecting to see his car following me. Every knock at the door, every unknown number on my phone, sends my heart racing. I moved out of my apartment a few months after I quit the diner. I couldn't stand being there anymore, knowing that he had been so close, that he had watched me without me even realizing it. I never saw Adrian again, but that doesn't mean I've stopped looking over my shoulder, because somewhere out there, I know he's still watching, and I don't know when or if he'll come back. If these stories made your heart race, don't forget to hit that like button and share the chills with your friends. Subscribe for more terrifying tales, and make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your next meal might just have a story of its own. Stay safe out there, because danger could be closer than you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next night.